modern educators would say. I mean, this is what they're trying to do, is teach them how to think, but they don't actually teach them at all any knowledge. And so, I mean, I think our end goal is to think as free people. We know that we have to teach this content in order to get there.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm Jessica Gardner, and I am here today with Paul Schaefer, Tanya Charlton, and Martin Cothran. It's great to have the old gang back, because I can't call you normal.
This is true.
Good
I missed you all last week.
I know.
Did you say old gang?
I did.
She did.
I do
see a few gray hairs there. Quite a few gray hairs over here. I'm getting my hair dyed later.
Yeah, so because we don't dye our hair.
Oh, that's funny. Well, today we're talking about imitation and emulation, how they're beneficial for students and what the difference might be between those two, and if we all agree. So it's going to be a good discussion. Before that, how is our summer reading going? Paul?
I finally
You just
finished...
had a book in your hand.
Oh, well, yeah, that's... I don't often think of those books as when I'm saying what I'm reading, but...
You should, though.
I just finished The Hounds of God. That's
Sabatini?
Sabatini. I mean, it's taken me, at least this is the third episode I've mentioned it because I'm getting so little reading done at home.
It's not like me and War and Peace that went on for half a year.
But I'm proud of it because it's reading I did at home in the midst of all my daily life.
And it was good.
It was good. Yeah. It was not It wasn't as much swashbuckling Sabatini as I would have expected. It's more because it deals with the Inquisition and
oh wow.
And so it's more how can the Spaniards and the English extract themselves from the problems they now have because one considers the others heretics, and then you've got the Holy Office over here trying to establish this, and it was all based upon a Spaniard kidnapping a British woman that he wanted to marry, and she didn't want to marry him. And there's so it's a bunch of ethical problems. Whereas Sabatini, normally it's very clear who's in the wrong, and we're just how is it going to come together where the right is done? And this is really
like some gray.
Yeah, and
gray.
And it's more questions of conscience and questions of what is right to do.
Oh, that sounds good.
So it was interesting. I expected a little more swashbuckling than I got in the end.
Sorry about that.
It's all right.
Because summer is swashbuckling time, right?
Yes. I need to go find another swashbuckle. But I was reading How to Think Like Shakespeare. That's what I was reading as I sat here and waited for you all.
By Scott Newstock.
Yes.
And?
I'm only maybe I'm halfway through. It's nice. It's, I wish I were taking more time to sit and think about every paragraph he saying, because it's jam-packed with quotations. And so you have to kind of follow that thread and come back. And so it's not as easy of a read of just a straight up, here's the argument I'm making.
Shakespeare? Is he quoting Shakespeare?
He's quoting Shakespeare, but he's quoting everybody. I mean, there's slews of authors he's quoting from. And
that sounds fun.
But it is very much in the medieval and Renaissance mind, which is nice. And so I was critiquing it actually before we started of how I thought it was all about education. And there was a chapter in there that was all about fitness, but he only talked about education for one little side note. But everything he had to say about fitness was really fascinating. And so
like working out fitness?
No,
physical fitness?
as in something is appropriate, something fits.
Oh.
And that idea, and that how if we were to talk about education as being fit to the individual, what do we mean when we say that something is fit? And so, but I mean, that whole concept is a really interesting thing to think about.
Well, it's something we talk about all the time. Are we fitting the education to the child, or are we fitting the child to the education?
Well, and classical education would prefer which one?
The child to the education.
Yeah. That's one of the I had a quote from E.D. Hirsch that was in one of the readings for my pedagogy class that said the difference between modern education and classical education is modern education tries to fit civilization, how do they put it, to nature. Whereas classical education tries to fit nature to civilization. That you're correcting nature in what you that's not quite the quote, but it's something like that. But I thought it was
By ordering it properly.
Reminded me of that. Yeah.
Ordering it properly. I like that better than correcting nature.
Yeah.
Right.
Aligning it.
Yeah.
Interesting. How about you? Reading?
I am reading. I'm always reading. I'm reading a book that one of our listeners actually emailed and recommended to me. It's out of print. It's called Nearby, and it's about this little town. The name of the town is Nearby, and it's in New England in the 1940s. And the author's name is Elizabeth Yates, and I had never heard of her. I've never read anything by her. She wrote quite a bit, but it's very good. I'm just so thrilled that that she recommended it to me, and that I had to search it out to get it, because
is
it is
a
out of
mystery?
It's about a school teacher in a one-room school in this little town in New England in the 40s, and there's so much that happens inside the classroom, so that you're seeing how she's teaching, and it's just her descriptions of nature are just beautiful. She's a very good writer. Her prose is beautiful. And then it deals heavily with the theme of prejudice in the 40s. And this school teacher, who loves all of these children and especially tries to take care of the underdogs. I'm about halfway through, but it is very good. And it's a very nice, pleasant summer read, because it's just her descriptions of winter and of spring are all just so good. So that's me.
But I felt like early on you were setting this up for something more comic. Because if the town's name is Nearby, I'm from Nearby.
But that's just charming, isn't it?
Yeah, I just felt like it's a perfect setup for like a Who's on First sort of routine.
No, it's literally this town is, I guess, nearby something.
But it's dealing with
it's a
fairly
small,
heavy
rural
themes.
town.
Yeah.
Yes, and the prejudice that can exist within it. It's like a microcosm. Yeah, really good. I would highly recommend it if you can find it.
I like books like that.
You would like this.
Yes. I'll look at that.
Okay.
Are you looking at me implicitly asking me the question of what I read?
Indeed.
So I'm teaching. I have 4 classes to teach this summer with the college, and one of them I'm reading the text for it. The class is Material Logic.
And, good gracious!
And
Martin,
are you kidding
It's a brilliant text.
Will you stop him? Just stop him.
The old man keeps talking.
My God.
No, it's weird reading a book that you wrote, particularly one that you wrote 20 years ago. I'm looking at this and thinking, I could never do this now. How did I do it then?
Remember when Brian and I edited it?
Oh, yes.
And we thought that you had written just terribly, and it was Francis Bacon.
Well, there was a case study.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a case study.
So it was
and it was written by
Francis
Bacon. And
we were like, why is Martin writing like this? It's so archaic.
And they start changing it. They're changing Francis Bacon's writing.
And then we get to the end and it says Francis Bacon, and we're like, we just wasted an hour and a half. It was literally an hour and a half that I stood over Brian's shoulder while we corrected it together. So then it was like Control
Undo.
Control Z.
Yes, undo.
Yeah. So for my classical pedagogy class, I had to reread E.D. Hirsch, his book, The Schools We Need and Why We Don't Have Them, which we carry. And that is such a brilliant book. How somebody, and a lot of people don't know this about Hirsch, but Hirsch was a major league intellectual academic. I mean, in philosophical hermeneutics. It was Martin Heidegger, Hans Gadamer, and E.D. Hirsch. I mean, those were the big three. I mean, so somebody of that stature. And he goes and he looks at the development of educational theory over the last 150 years. And he just nails it. He just talks about this emphasis on psychology, we were kind of talking about earlier, and the decline of the interest in knowledge. And he just has a brilliant treatment of that. And I think his two books, The Schools We Need and Why We Don't Have Them, which really kind of tracks that romanticist emphasis in education theory since Rousseau, and then his book, Why Knowledge Matters, which is more purely about the decline in the emphasis on knowledge in schools. Those two books, I don't know of two books that are better. And the part of the power, because like he's been accused, the education establishment was so angry at him back in the I guess it was the 80s and mostly the 90s, I guess, because they thought he was this like arch conservative. They were calling him Nazi, all these terrible labels. Well, he's actually a political liberal, and he talks about French education theory where you had Gramsci and Fieri, and they were both very influential in education. But Gramsci was not a romantic; he was a left wing, but he understood that kids need to know things. And Fieri was also left wing, and so there was these two strains of even on the left, and he basically says, "I follow Gramsci here. Knowledge is important." And so I like the fact that you can say, I'm with you guys ideologically, but sorry, but this is the fact.
I mean, that's how we used to be, and now we need to be. We need to all be able, regardless of where we fall politically, even religiously, we all need to be very concerned about children's education from wherever we are, because that is the thing that is, I think, the biggest problem in our country. Is that we're not educating children anymore, but we are. We are. But we're such a tiny little pocket.
It's a multi-generational effort, Tanya.
It's going to be, you're right.
You do one generation, they grow up, they have kids, they train their kids, and it expands that way.
That's what it's
we're already seeing it. Because you're already seeing kids.
Oh, it's so much bigger than it was when I even educated my children. But
even you go to homeschool conventions now and you have people coming and saying, well, I grew up using Memoria Press curriculum and I want to use that for my kids.
That is true. And that's fun.
Well, I was in a meeting where Jeremy Tate was in the meeting from the head of this classic learning test. And he said, look, we consider Highlands Latin School the gold standard. You all are a model across the country. So you don't need to be big. You just need to be influential. And I think we are. If we can pat ourselves in the back.
Well, yeah. And because what we're trying to do is, the culture here is interesting because it's everybody wants to do what they're doing very, very well, which then raises that bar, right? It's not just, we're just coming in here to, I guess we got to teach some kids today. It's like, no, what's the best way to teach these kids?
That's right.
Which is fun.
Yeah. Well, on to today's topic. Imitation and emulation. And Tanya, this has been on your mind. You've been thinking about it lately.
I have.
Can you tell us where it came from?
Yes.
Why it's been on your mind?
Okay. Well, during our conference, I was walking down the hall with Dr. Hankins, taking him to the Memoria College seminar.
Dr. James Hankins, the author of Virtue Politics.
And this is
received the pardon as a surprise.
Yes.
And, this is funny because this is now the second episode we've done that was generated by conversations one of us had with Dr. Hankins.
Also, where he would like to replace one word with another word.
Right.
And this is really the same thing, but just a different conversation. And we didn't, because we were going down the hall and he was going into the seminar, we didn't get to really finish it was literally a comment he made in passing. And I just asked these guys what they thought about it because I just didn't know what he meant by it. But I said something about imitation, and he said, we should really use the word emulate, not imitate. And so I thought, well, same thing. Last week we did eloquence instead of rhetoric. I mean, it really is just, it's very precise vocabulary that he's asking for. But I didn't really understand the difference between emulate and imitate. Mm-hmm. And so I asked these guys what they thought about it. And I do, when I look up the definition of emulate, I mean, you can Google it, and Google actually tells you that emulate really just goes one step further than imitating, that it's not just imitating to be like, but to emulate would be to imitate with the idea that you are going to make whatever it is you're imitating better or innovate it.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean,
Martin has an opinion.
Imitate has that sense of just replication,
or
doing
copying.
The same thing, copying, right? Whereas emulating has this idea that you are wanting to not only replicate something, but in the sense of sort of viscerally admiring the thing that you are emulating and changing yourself in accordance with that. I think that there's a final causation in the Aristotelian sense with this.
Those are two very different things, right? Because what Tanya was saying, she was getting from Almighty Google was that it was with the end or goal of the one doing the emulating of improving or
taking it a step further
than the original. Mm-hmm. Whereas what you're saying is this idea of emulating is changing the one who is emulating to fit what they are emulating.
Right.
Like it changes them.
Those are two different things.
I haven't seen that. I don't remember that in the definition in Google, but
right. That's what I'm saying. That's what I was hearing you say, though.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a sense of a desire in emulation. There's this sense of a desire that you want to be like that. There's a respect or an honoring. It's not just a replication. It's a way of becoming yourself in the deepest sense, more like this thing that you're just replicating.
Right. Like with children, we are giving them things to emulate or to imitate, whichever. Mm-hmm. Really, at the beginning, I think we're really giving them things to imitate. Mm-hmm. I mean, would you say emulation for a first grader? I don't.
No, like
so.
we want them to straight up copy that.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
We were talking about rhetoric last week, and that ethos, logos, pathos, that distinction between those three terms, and how ethos is the power of the teacher. There is a magnetism in a good teacher. There is some kind of magnetism that your students are attracted to your character as a person. And so I think there's a little bit of that in this definition that, I mean, there's kids in a class and in like particularly on the lower level where you have a lot of female teachers, there's a lot of girls who want to be like that teacher when they grow up. Mm-hmm. There's that sense, right?
Yes.
They want to emulate that teacher. And it's pathos driven. Yeah, one of the other means of persuasion. It's pathos driven in the sense that it's the students' emotions, and emotionally they want to be like that person. And boys, I think this comes into play later on in education, when they have a male teacher in the classroom. And they want to be like that when they grow up. That there's, I think that's when I hear emulation, that's what I think of, is that kind of thing.
Well, and I think there's a difference between emulating the teacher in the classroom and emulating the author of a great work that we're reading, right? And so when you're dealing with a first grader and you're asking them to copy, whether that's scripture, whether that's, a quote from George Washington, whatever it is, you're really not asking them to emulate George Washington. They don't even really know who George Washington is. You're asking them to imitate exactly what he said, right? We're asking them to copy that. We're asking them to memorize that. We're asking them to make that a part of themselves. But there's, and obviously they're going to be introduced to who George Washington is. They're going to be introduced to why this is important for us. But the massive thrust of that is right now, what you need to do is copy this thing. Right.
And what's interesting about that, Paul, is there are other educational approaches that would say, oh no, you need to generate something on your own,
Right, very much. And that's a distinction where, I might fall more on the side of, in the primary levels in grammar school, we're doing a whole lot of imitating.
Mm-hmm.
And then as the child grows, we're trying to flip them towards more emulation.
That feels right to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's what Dr. Hankins meant or not. I mean, we're literally having a conversation based on a sentence that he said to me that I really just did not have a chance to talk to him about again. But I do feel like that's what we're doing is...
Well, and the way you kind of put it before, emulation is imitation plus something. Mm-hmm. So it's a part.
Well, Google put it that way.
Yeah. I think that's correct.
That.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, I like that. I like that idea of it. That seems to fit what it is. So imitation is a part. That's a part of emulation. But there's something more than that.
Then it just goes a little bit further.
Which means in the early years, you're just going to do the first part of that. That's all you really can do. And then later on, they'll come to see.
And any good teacher, even if we're using the word imitate, any good master teacher is going to encourage the act of emulation, right? That otherwise you can't get going back to the whole idea of ethos and getting the students to and pathos to emotionally want this thing. Mm-hmm. Like if you ask I'm thinking back, when asking the 7th graders to memorize the opening lines of the Iliad, in English when we were reading in English. If I'm going up here, well, Homer's just, he's pagan, full of crazy ideas, and why would they memorize that, right? But no, what I have to do is say why Homer is so important to know, why this speaks to us as human beings, and therefore, right? So that is all this encouraging of this emulation while asking them to imitate the words, right?
Right.
Yeah, and when I think I've said this before, when I was an editorials editor in my college newspaper, I had a weekly column, and I was reading a lot of, and of course there was a lot of political things coming up, and I was reading the old National Review magazine with William F. Buckley, and I was copying. I have the three volumes of the 3 years I spent there in my garage. And you open those up and I read those columns and think, oh gosh, that was such a shameless imitation of Buckley or Joseph Sobran or whoever was writers I liked at the time. But it was a great exercise and this is what part of what classical education is about, is copying the masters. Picasso goes into the Louvre before he ever innovates and develops cubism and all that stuff. He went into the Louvre and copied the masters.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so that's really what classical education is. It's copying the masters. And, if you have to memorize something
but then Picasso did
innovate.
Make it his own.
He made it his own and he innovated.
Mm-hmm. But he had to go through that first stage first of imitation.
Mm-hmm. So I don't trust any innovation in any kind of art, writing, painting, whatever it is, unless that person could do what the masters do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a friend who he wanted to get into writing, and he had a professor tell him, like, you need to choose an author to be like, and he chose Mark Twain. And when I read, he wrote a book. He was trying to make a go at this, and when I read that book, I was like, I can hear Mark Twain in this writing.
Wow.
And so it was interesting, but right. I think for him to have become great, he would have taken that skill and then made it his own.
Yeah, and I think I may have used this example on the show before, but when Eric Clapton was asked, the guitar player, was asked how he learned to play like he did, and that this person wanted to imitate Eric Clapton, and Eric Clapton said, "Don't imitate me. If you want to play like me, don't imitate me. Imitate the people I imitated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so it's nice that you want to write like Mark Twain, but how did Mark Twain and how was he able to write like Mark Twain?
Yeah.
You know.
Well, also there's the story in Famous Men of Greece where Thucydides wants to become a great orator, and he copies the speeches of Demosthenes 8 times.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes off and becomes a great orator. But he also writes the Peloponnesian War, which is this thick. So I think he started out in imitation, but then I do feel like he then was able to take what he had learned and make it his own. And, you know, we're only asking young children to imitate because they're not ready to do anything else than that. But except I do agree with you about the relationship between the student and the teacher, but we're asking them to imitate by showing them beautiful art, listening to beautiful music.
I was just using that as an example,
Right.
the kind of thing we do want to do on the content itself.
But then eventually we want them to be able to interpret those things and actually use them as tools.
Well, right. That's exactly what I was thinking when you're describing imitation exercises, even for little ones. It isn't just for the sake of filling their minds. It's really equipping their minds.
It is equipping them.
It's such an equipping. And when you contrast the equipping that imitation does with, say you tell a first grader, just tell me a story, write a story, that really doesn't seem like it's equipping them with much.
Well, when they,
journal, whatever the prompt might be.
Writing their own creative story, that really is not the best use of time because they are not equipped to do that. They're not even equipped necessarily to write a sentence and spell all the words correctly and punctuate it. So
not even
so
equipped
really,
to form the letters correctly sometimes when they're asked to do that.
If they're that young when they're asked to do it, it's just a total way. You know, we've got such little time with students that we've just got to do the best we can to make it the best use of their time.
Yeah, I have. We could do a whole show on the journaling thing.
Come on, Martin.
Well, for one thing, it's an example of verbing. Journaling. You take a noun and you put an ing on the end.
Okay, we're starting there.
Did you just verb the word verbing?
The word verb is the word verbing is verbing. Yeah, so it's an example of what he describes. But you know, it's because it's uncontrolled. It's like just we're gonna, honey. I know you don't know how to swim, okay, but I'm gonna take you out to the deep end and just drop you in. I mean, the result will not be good.
Nope.
And it doesn't help your writing. You need to spend your early years not innovating. We don't want you innovating. We want you copying. We want you replicating. We want you emulating. That's what we want you to do. And when you read, we don't talk enough about this. When you read somebody, that is changing your thinking the whole time, because a writer thinks in a certain way. And if he's a good writer, that thinking is coming into his writing very clearly and accurately. And so, I was reading Scott Newstock's How to Think Like Shakespeare because I'm really interested in this thinking skills issue. But what nobody talks about in this whole thinking skills debate is, who do you read? Do you read good writers who are good thinkers? Usually a good writer is a good thinker, but when you read Wendell Berry, it's changing. It's not just changing your appreciation for writing it is changing your way of thinking because he thinks about things in a certain way and it comes through crystal clear in his writing. And so, most of what you have to do in order to be a good writer is to be a good thinker. And they're tied so very intimately together.
And you can't be a good thinker until you've been taught, so that you've got actually something to think about.
Right.
It's the same thing, I think, with, when we say we don't teach children what to think, we teach them how to think. It's the same thing.
Exactly.
It's just, we start out with a lot of, I was listening to an interview with Catherine Burblesing, the strict headmistress in England.
The strictest.
Strictest headmistress in England. If you Google strictest headmistress
She's known for that
in the world, that's what she's known for.
Like nickname.
Her name.
She's got a really impressive school in London. And And she said she really had a beef with we educators, journalists, all the people who use that term. And her criticism was that she said, you do have to teach children what to think. So she was just misunderstanding how we use it. We are teaching them knowledge and fact. I mean, that's what she was saying, is if you don't tell them and give them facts, give them dates, give them history, give them vocabulary. You've got to give them those things, which we are doing. And that's a
huge part of what we're doing. It's not just like we're doing that, but we're focused on how to think. No, like that is like a massive part of what we do.
The load-bearing walls.
but the way we say it, right? We teach them not what to think, but how to think, makes people think that we're not actually doing that.
But we really are, and I don't know how to make it any more clear. By teaching them all of that knowledge, and then teaching them the skills of logic, rhetoric, Latin, all of those things that train their minds, then they know how to think. So I don't know really how to defend, how to fix that statement that we're teaching children how to think, not what to think.
Well, the response to it is simply, how do you teach them how to think if they don't have anything to think about?
But that's the thing, is that a lot of modern educators would say, I mean, this is what they're trying to do, is teach them how to think, but they don't actually teach them at all any knowledge. And so, I mean, I think this distinction, and you, Tanya, you had told me about that interview, so I went and listened to half of it. I haven't finished it. But it seemed that her massive impetus in her school is passing on the British culture.
It is.
And that is a noble goal. That is one thing that her community needs, and she is finding great success in doing that. And I think probably implicitly she's then having them progress through the liberal arts where they can think as free people because they have that content knowledge, whereas we're saying our end goal is to think as free people. Mm-hmm. We know that we have to teach this content in order to get there. Whereas her main thing is, I need to teach you this content because she's in a world in which that content is actively, it's actively criticized and put down to pass on that knowledge. And that's what she's fighting. Whereas
she's fighting progressivism just like we are.
But us in the Midwest, like we are fighting some of that. But, generally people are like, we're going to teach American history. No, like in our area, people aren't like, oh, that's a horrible thing to do. In her area, that very well could be teaching the monarchy. And
I don't know. I think she said that, and it may not have been in this interview, but I've heard her say that she focuses on the fact that they're all British because her school is like a charter school here. It's a free school. And like half of her students are Muslim. She has Hindus, Christians, Buddhists. She's got Eastern Europeans, a few Eastern Europeans, but it's all different minorities together.
Interesting.
And that's the one thing that will unify her school. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that draws them all together and says, we are one body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the reality, I mean, from our desire to pass on Western civilization, what she's doing in microcosm, we want to do as a society, right? Like we need a common body of knowledge that we pass down.
Yes, and I think she would like to do it as a society, but there's nobody on her side.
And to the other response to this, we're going to teach how to think, not what to think. It's like saying I'm just going to stop eating food. I'm just going to take dietary supplements and get the benefits out of those. I'm going to just do balance of nature, and I'm going to do all the. Well, you're going to have some problems if you try to do that, for one thing. But why will you just eat real good food? Just stop this nonsense. I'm going to have a problem with all this dietary supplements.
What are you comparing that to?
I'm comparing it to the idea that you can know how to think without what to think. That you're trying to go.
Right.
Yeah, you're trying to go directly to this.
But she's criticizing us because she thinks when we say we're teaching students how to think, that it's not content driven, because we're saying we're teaching you how to think.
And we're not teaching you what to think, and therefore we're not teaching you any facts, because that would be teaching you what to think.
But I'm saying they're trying to get to this end without the necessary means, which is the content.
People who are thinking.
Right. Right. We agree with the strictest headmistress
We actually
in
agree
England.
with her.
Right.
She just doesn't know it.
Yeah. And does our message need to be clearer of, no, in fact, you have, I mean, we say this all the time, but it doesn't fit in the slogan of, we say all the time, you have to teach content. You have to teach content.
Well, it's
That's why you're talking about why knowledge matters. That's where we started right at the very beginning.
That's
Right.
right.
I know, but it's like gold. You know, if you have gold needs an alloy. Education needs skills need an alloy, and the alloy is knowledge, right? Because gold has to have other things in it. Otherwise, it's just powder, right? It's got to have some kind of alloy to it that makes it a solid thing. And I think education is the same way. Educational gold has alloys.
You're agreeing with her.
I am. That's what I was agreeing before.
Well, I knew we agreed with her. I was just concerned that she misunderstood based on that slogan we throw around all the time, that she misunderstood what we're doing.
We're
not us personally, but just everybody.
I hope we're not using that we're teaching how to think, not what to think. We don't
use that all the time, Martin.
Only in derision. I mean, that is a terrible. I have spent my whole life opposing that slogan.
No.
I will find you some articles that you have written, and I will show those to you.
We're teaching how to think, not what to think. I have never, ever said that except to make fun of it.
I do not believe
that. You all have it exactly.
Absolutely not. I will. This will be fun.
This will be fun on this one.
Next episode, and we really think it can't be both. We can't be doing both.
Well, we are doing both. We are doing both. Yes, but when we say we're not teaching children what to think, it just means we're not turning them into robots. Like we're not.
And we're not using them as political pawns. And that's always been your point in the speeches. I've heard you say this, is we're not using education as a means to an ends to affect political change. And you've used it in that context to say, we're not teaching you what to think. We're not teaching you what to think politically.
Well, we're not teaching you dogma, but we're certainly teaching you knowledge.
Right.
And that you can't know how to think unless you have stuff to think about.
But you've used that slogan
this is a whole,
in the context of not,
this is a whole
not
chapter
using it
in the book I'm writing on critical thinking skills. I
think you're going to find what you need.
Okay. Well, and then maybe next episode we'll bring it in. I would love that little show and tell.
We'll see how it goes for them, Jeff.
Show and tell.
Yeah.
But that is an interesting thought exercise to think through. How would you describe really quickly and clearly the progression that really is necessary and intentional? Right.
That would be just a quick little, instead of an hour-long podcast explaining it. I think our curriculum showed you that we are definitely imparting knowledge, like clearly imparting lots of knowledge, and hopefully by the time we get to middle school and we start asking more abstract questions, then we see that we're really opening it up. And really by fourth grade, we're starting to ask a little bit more abstract questions where students have to think, where, little kids need black and white. They need to be able to have an answer, but you've got to get them beyond that and to where they can consider, some things are maybe a little gray. When you get to Robin Hood, is he being unjust by stealing? Even though he's giving it to the poor, those kinds of questions.
Is it wrong to steal from someone who has stolen?
Yeah, it's all. Yeah, we start asking
all
those questions,
right?
Yes, and it's fun. It's so fun to see their little minds working, but it's also eye-opening to see how difficult it is for students to start thinking like that. To get away from black and white, and some students really push back against it. They don't want gray. They want black and white. And so it's nice to see those little brains expand and that, that they can start thinking about, because they all love Robin Hood, but he's a thief. Is he a thief?
No, he is taking something from someone who took it from somebody else. It's not theirs.
But
Stealing
is-
is taking something
but
from somebody
is-
that's theirs.
But is the sheriff, Martin, is the sheriff a legitimately appointed
No, isn't that
government
the point of
representative?
Robin Hood is that who's the king that's on the
King
Crusades?
John.
King-
Well,
it's
King
King
Richard's
King Richard's on the
in
Crusades,
prison.
and John has usurped his power. Right?
That doesn't change right from wrong, though.
No, but what again? Is it wrong to take somebody from somebody who from somebody? Take something from somebody that is not theirs. They stole it. And Robin Hood is helping to feed people, isn't he? I mean, in the
Yes.
story.
Right. So the question is, does the
He's
end
giving it
justify the
back.
means?
That's the whole gray question.
Right. So,
Mhm.
so does
That's like saying, can you shoot somebody who's trying to shoot at you? Well, of course you can. You're
Okay.
no. You
He's
just
breaking one of the 10 commandments.
That. I don't think that's what the commandments.
So, okay, so
That's the
this
whole,
is
the whole
precisely
question in Robin Hood is
the argument.
Is it what?
this is
what the
precisely
commandment is
the
talking
argument we're trying to get the kids to have. Right.
And even we're having problems with
Right,
it. Right?
right? At a little 5th grade, 6th grade level, right?
Yes. Well, some of us may have trouble with gray areas. Martin.
But it really does help demonstrate, even back to the original, imitation has its place developmentally with children
It
as
absolutely
they grow,
does.
as they are capable of abstract thought. And then
That's
they
right.
move on to more complex forms of interacting with content.
Yes, and especially now with social media, just to fill their minds with great things, beautiful things, things worthy of their minds being filled with, is more important today than it ever was. But we're doing less of it. We're doing less imitation and more creation.
I would like to share one little story from yesterday that about imitation and memory. So our calendar from Memoria Press that I have fought against for years this year
Yes.
is poems.
I didn't know you fought against the
Oh
calendar.
yeah,
Yes,
it's a long
he's all
story.
about
Long
electronic.
story.
All about
Anyway.
electronic.
And so anytime we print this
I
calendar,
give those as gifts.
that's nice. Anytime we print these calendars, Michelle will come around and insist that I hang one up. And then my deal with her is if you hang it up, then you have to change it every month because I'm just never going to think about it or look at it. Well, so then Tanya got on my case a couple days ago that why was my calendar still in June? And so I waited for Michelle to show up. I said, Michelle, you need to change my calendar because Tanya is upset about this. But then it made me look at the calendar. And I think Johnny made a comment about, he could almost recite that one from memory still.
Oh,
And I
that's
started
so nice.
flipping through the poems and going, okay, which ones of these do I still know? And thinking back about when I was in 8th grade and my English teacher, like once a month, would write a poem on the board from memory and say, write it down. And this is what you have to memorize. And they were poems from, all Shakespeare and Robert Frost and whoever else. And honestly, I don't think I really understood most of them that I memorized. But now I have them at my disposal where I will pull them out. Like after we had this conversation, all of a sudden I just started quoting Shakespeare, as I was leaving the office and going, wow, that's really nice that I can do that. And it was just because I was forced to, as a child, memorize these things that I did not appreciate at the time.
Right. But your parents and your teachers were, they were confident enough in the fact that was a good use of your time.
And now it's paying off. I remember memorizing
look
The
at
Raven.
Oh.
It's like you have these moments where you're feeling this emotion and that poem can come out.
Right.
And it gives you words that you wouldn't have to express that emotion. And
So what you were doing initially was just imitating. You weren't emulating.
correct.
Okay. And then that parlayed itself into emulation.
Mhm.
That's, I think, the lesson here.
Well, that's what I don't know that that's what Dr. Hankins meant, but that's what we've done
We
with
won't
it.
know. We won't know.
That's right.
But we're happy with where we got.
That's right.
Oh, thanks for joining us. We will be back next time. Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.